All right, welcome to another installment of the Quadruple D, and this is episode 66, part 2, where I discuss Ivana Trump being buried in a golf course. That's right. I'm revisiting this topic. I've got a little bit more information, that might make it more interesting. First, though, I do want to discuss. I was away for a few days, for like 3 days, visiting family members, and don't worry, I'm not talking about Manson family members. I was just hanging out with my mother and my brother for a couple of days. We watched a bunch of movies, and had a good time. And it kind of resulted in me not making as many episodes. I only recorded one episode while I was away for those 3 days. But now I'm getting back on the horse, and I promise there will be some more episodes produced. And by getting back on the horse, I do not mean heroin, so don't worry about that either. And so, I'm not in with the Manson family. I'm not getting high on heroin. So you don't need to be concerned about that. But speaking of Manson like families, I'm going to get back into the Trump cult here. So let's look at Ivana Marie Trump, who was born Zelnikova. So she was born on February 20th, 1949, in Czechoslovakia, and later became a naturalized American citizen. So, an immigrant, in other words. How about that? And, she began her career as a model and skier before moving to Canada in the 1970s, where she worked as a model there. And in 1976, while in New York City with a group of models, she met Donald Trump, and they married on April 9th, 1977, at Marble Collegiate Church with Norman Vincent Peale officiating. So, so far it actually sounds relatively normal. I mean, it does imply that Donald Trump is a superficial type of person, right? He's apparently drawn to models. So it kind of fits together with the image of Trump being somebody who just views women as sex objects or whatever. But I mean, that's just something that you might be able to brush off. It's not necessarily that bad onto itself. So let's move on. During their marriage, Ivana held significant positions in the Trump Organization, serving as Vice President of Interior Design, CEO and President of Trump's Castle Casino Resort, and manager of the Plaza Hotel. The couple became prominent figures in New York society throughout the 1980s, working together on major projects including Trump Tower, the renovation of the Grand Hyatt Hotel, and the construction of the Trump Taj Mahal Casino Resort. And yes, this was all evidence way back then of Trump's proclivity for putting his name on everything that he touches. He definitely is egocentric. Everything he does, it's got to have the Trump brand name on it. And that's not annoying at all. And of course, they had three little hellspawn together: Don Jr., Ivanka, and Eric. And the Trump's divorce proceedings received worldwide publicity, with front page coverage appearing in New York tabloid papers for 11 consecutive days. And in a deposition relating to their divorce, Ivana accused Donald Trump of, let's just use the word, sexual violence, describing a violent assault that allegedly occurred in 1989 after he had undergone a painful scalp surgery. According to the deposition, Trump, quote, held back Ivana's arms and began to pull out fistfuls of hair from her scalp, end quote, before sexually assaulting her. So, that was one of the early known instances of Trump being accused of this type of behavior, right? This sort of criminal and violent behavior. And Ivana later clarified her statement, saying, I refer to this as a blank because I'm not supposed to say that word on YouTube, apparently. But I do not want my words to be interpreted in a literal or criminal sense. That was probably her facing a little bit of pressure in terms of lawsuits and maybe some other threats. And she added, quote, as a woman, I felt violated, end quote. So she did still feel bold enough to say that much, that she felt violated. But the divorce was granted in December 1990 on grounds that Donald Trump's treatment of Ivana, including his affair with Marla Maples, was cruel and inhuman. Now, I don't know if having an affair is actually inhuman. I mean, that to me sounds human enough. But that's what the court said anyway, apparently. And as part of the settlement, Ivana signed a confidentiality agreement preventing her from discussing their marriage without Donald's permission. So keep that in mind. Trump is actually pretty famous for these non disclosure agreements, sometimes just called NDAs. And his own ex wife was one of those. So keep that in mind at all times. That's something that Trump likes to do. And in 2015, when the allegations resurfaced, Ivana released another statement to CNN saying, quote, I have recently read some comments attributed to me from nearly 30 years ago at a time of very high tension during my divorce from Donald. The story is totally without merit, unquote. Well, okay, all right, but what about all the other stories, that people have put out there? But anyway, Ivana also expressed that she had, quote, nothing but fondness for Donald and wish him the best of luck on his campaign, end quote. So I will let you believe what you want about that, but keep in mind this is somebody who was legally basically muzzled from saying anything bad about her ex-husband, and that is actually known as a thing that was in place. And after the divorce, Ivana developed her own lines of clothing, fashion jewelry, and beauty products sold on QVC UK and the Home Shopping Network. She wrote an advice column called Ask Ivana for Globe magazine from 95 to 2010, and she published several books. And one of them was an autobiography called Raising Trump. Hmm. Yeah, all right. So, Ivana Trump, of course, she did die on July 14th, 2022, with the official cause being that she fell down the stairs and had some, I guess, blunt force trauma to her torso or something like that. And this was at the age of 73. So, I got to be real here. People do sometimes fall down the stairs, right? I actually know somebody who died that way. He was somebody that used to date my own mom. So it does happen. He was apparently drunk and going down the basement steps, and he fell, and that was the end. So I'm not trying to downplay that as a possible reality here, but things get a little weird. I'm going to explain why they get weird here. So she was buried at Trump National Golf Club in Bedminster, New Jersey, one of Donald Trump's golf courses. And this burial location is often explained away as a tax gimmick for Trump's benefit, which seems scandalous enough on its own, but maybe a sort of weird explanation. But here's the question though. Is there any evidence that Ivana even liked golf? That's a real question. I know it sounds a bit like a silly thing to ask, but it is a real thing that's worth examining. Was she actually an avid golfer? I don't know. I've never seen any evidence of it. There is, to my knowledge, no public evidence that Ivana Trump had a personal interest in playing golf. In fact, from what I have examined, the available records and interviews typically show her preferring activities like skiing, tennis, and social events at the Mar-a-Lago spa. And I've not seen anything about golf being one of her hobbies. So it could be construed as a little odd to bury her in a golf course if she was not even a fan of golf. You know what I'm saying? It's like it's like burying me in a golf course when I didn't play golf. Why the hell would anybody do that? You know? It would make more sense for me to, just be buried in a normal way, or cremated, or whatever it'll end up being, Uh, but the point is, it's a little bit odd, and she often publicly remarked that her ex-husband Donald Trump was the one obsessed with the sport, and suggested he should focus on golf rather than politics. So in fact, she apparently actually, at least on a few occasions, might have mentioned it as like an insult to her ex-husband, like a slight little insult. But the burial site has also deservedly drawn attention, given a disturbing pattern in this little thing that's called the Epstein files. That's right. That's really what makes it even stranger and darker, because there really is actually some relevance if you look into that. The documents from the Justice Department's files, which you can read yourself online, they contain allegations that victims were threatened with being buried at a Trump golf course, specifically the Trump National Golf Club in Rancho Palos Verdes, California. And I've heard some people dismiss those allegations. They say that, oh, Trump didn't even officially own that golf course at the time that one of these allegations was made. But here's the thing about that, like, that doesn't really necessarily disprove anything, because he might have still just been in talks to own it, or might have been in legal limbo or something like that. He might have just been like the de facto owner of the golf course or something like that. And with these kind of things, there can be little gray areas, like somebody might technically own the property, but the paperwork might not have fully gone through yet, or something like that. I mean, if anybody out there knows more details on that, go ahead and let me know. But anyway, those allegations, which emerged in early 2026, include claims of sex trafficking at the California facility and threats to witnesses that they would end up as fertilizer on the back nine holes if they spoke out. So, some pretty dark stuff, and but it kind of makes it have a little bit of a twist when you think of Ivana Trump being buried in a golf course. Did she also end up as fertilizer? As far as like these types of threats go, like, is that how they regarded her? But was there a possibility that she was going to, say something that Donald Trump would not have liked? Shit. So, anyway, before I was interrupted, so here are some specific aspects of these allegations. The FBI complaint records report that victims were told they would be buried on the Trump golf course by security personnel linked to the trafficking ring. And this is according to multiple FBI reports that you can read yourself in the Epstein files, and they are from two separate individuals calling the FBI years apart, and they reported the same allegation that a girl was strangled to death during a sex party and buried behind the 19th hole at the Rancho Palos Verdes course. So these are claims of trafficking, and witnesses and complainants described sex parties at the Trump golf course involving Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein, with reports that some girls went missing. And the reports specifically point to the Trump golf course in Rancho Palos Verdes, California, between 1995 and 1996. So, Just to be clear, these are uncorroborated allegations, but if you have the orange one at the top, they will never be investigated. And many of the files, which include FBI 302 reports and tips from the National Threat Operations Center, were deemed not credible by investigators at the time. But of course, that does not necessarily mean they have no factual basis. And we also understand that, yes, somebody actually has been buried in a golf course, which makes these allegations seem all the creepier and all the more plausible. So, Trump's position, of course, Trump has consistently denied any wrongdoing in connection with Epstein and has referred to the allegations as a hoax that is designed to damage him, which is a little bit strange because, of course, there are also allegations of Democrats being tied with Jeffrey Epstein as well. And that includes, of course, Bill Clinton. So the idea that this was just a Democrat hoax to take down Donald Trump is pretty absurd, especially when, we all know that other people might be held accountable who technically are not Republicans, right? So the files also include an email claiming that two foreign girls were buried at Zorro Ranch, which is another location, and that is Epstein's New Mexico compound. So it's further evidence that people might have been buried, similar to these fertilizer claims. So some people say that the specific threat, it resurfaced because you know, Ivana Trump was buried at the Trump National Golf Club in Bedminster, New Jersey. So I'm not the only person who has made note of this. I'm not the only one who connected the dots, so to speak, but, it is interesting. And throughout his public life, of course, Donald Trump has made numerous creepy comments about his own daughters, particularly Ivanka. In interviews and public appearances, he remarked on her figure, saying that he would have dated her if they weren't related, and made other inappropriate comments that have been widely criticized as crossing boundaries of appropriate father daughter relationships. And, you know, as creepy as it is, it might sound creepy for even me to say this right now, but I'm going to go ahead and say it. If it was just one instance, it might be a little bit easier for people to just shrug it off. But this is a repeated pattern. And really, the most blatant one was when Trump and Ivanka appeared on the Wendy Williams show. And, well, Wendy Williams asked a simple enough question, a perfectly normal question. She asked Donald and Ivanka what they had in common. And Ivanka answered that she had business in common with her father. But Donald's answer was ultra creepy. He said they had sex in common. So, yeah, you can find that video. And this was before the age of AI, and it went out over national television, no less. And of course, Trump also made creepy comments about being able to look at girls in the Miss Teen USA pageant that he was involved in, that he owned. And he bragged about being able to walk around backstage while they were in the middle of dressing. And he said that he could get away with it because he could just say, "Oh, I was inspecting to make sure everything was all right." I bet he was inspecting that dirty dog that is also the president. But if it was, again, if it was just one thing, it might not seem as bad, right? Like, who hasn't had like some creepy moment in their life? You can even have something creepy happen by accident. But this is just such a like constant pattern that there might be something more to a lot of these allegations. There might be a lot more to a lot of these allegations. So anyway, you know, all of these comments and whatnot, they've been documented across various media outlets. And this was, again, before the age of AI where things could more easily be faked. and they contributed to public concerns about Trump's treatment of women and young girls, and also, yes, concerns about what may have actually happened to his ex wife.